Welcome to Chautauqua Art Gallery in Lakewood, New York. My name is Leslie. I own and manage the gallery, and this is the second video in our two-part series on framing. We work with a lot of artists who all have similar questions about economically framing their artwork and presenting it properly for a gallery space. And I'm just going to take you through some tips and tricks I've learned throughout my career from both professional framers and other artists. In our first video in the series, we covered framing canvas pieces. We used this beautiful mixed media painting by Carrie Trado as an example. You can find that in the blog on our website, chautauquaartgallery.com. For the second video, we're going to focus on works on paper that need to be framed under glass, and for that we will use artwork by our collage artist, Sarah Mahalik. And I'm going to take you through step by step how we frame this piece of Sarah's. Why do you need to frame something under glass? Most paper works need to be framed with glass in front of them, and that's because they need added protection. Canvas works can withstand the elements a little bit better than paper, and they need to be protected by glass. You also need to have a mat on your artwork if you're framing it under glass. If you don't have a mat, you'll need to use special spacers to keep your artwork from resting directly on the glass. If your artwork touches the glass, over time temperature changes in the room that it's in will cause your artwork to buckle or even get mildew on it. So putting the mat or spacers between your glass and your artwork will allow air to flow between the two and keep your artwork preserved properly. We're going to go through the whole framing process and finish off by showing you how to properly put wire on the back of your painting with hooks to hang. Most gallery spaces require that you hang two-dimensional works with wire on the wall. They do not like the gator clips or other methods of hanging. So we'll finish off by showing you how to get that wire on there. Okay, with that, let's get started. I want to show you some of the tools I'm going to be using throughout the process. I'll also put a link to these and where you can purchase them in the article that goes along with this tutorial. First of all, I have a nice metal ruler here that I'm going to use as a straight edge. I have linen hinging tape. This is an acid-free tape that I'm going to use to tack my artwork onto the mat in front of it. An X-acto knife, a framing awl, AWL, brown framing tape. This is not an acid-free tape. This is just used to adhere to the backing of the frame. An ATG tape gun. If you don't have a tape gun, you can also just use double-sided tape as well. Frame staples, and this is a tool, a hand tool that pushes the frame staples into the frame. If you do a lot of framing, you're going to want to use like a staple gun. This means especially for framing, but because I'm not doing too much with them, I just have this little hand tool, and it does a pretty good job. Here are the little staples that go in and hold the backing into the frame. And then I have, for the wire, to secure the wire to the frame, I use either these D-hooks, or I sometimes use screw eyes for my smaller frames. I get these screw eyes at the hardware store. They work really well on lightweight frames. The only trouble I've ever run into is if the wood is a very hard wood in the frame, I'm going to need to go back to the D-hooks anyways. And then my picture wire. Always hang with picture wire. Don't use another type of wire. I prefer coated wire. It's about the same cost as uncoated, and it's just a little easier on your fingers. You can get it in small quantities at the craft or hardware store, or you can order a larger quantity online. When you're ordering your wire, pay attention to the thickness of it and the gauge. It's going to tell you how much it holds on the package. This package holds 30 pounds of weight, and this wire, you can see, holds 20 pounds of weight. Both of those are going to be more than enough for what we're doing right now, and you can see it's still a pretty thin gauge, and it'll be easy to work with. Lastly, I don't have them sitting right here, but I'm going to need a little pair of wire cutters to snip this off when I'm done. All right, I'll clear this out of the way and I'll get the framing started. My first step in framing is making sure that my artwork is tacked onto the mat. I want to make sure it's firmly and securely held onto the mat, but I also want to make sure there's airflow between the mat and the artwork. If you were to tape it all the way down the edges behind the mat, it would probably buckle over time as the temperature of the air changed on the outside and the inside of the glass. So we want to just hinge it at the top with a linen hinging tape, and that will keep it from slipping in the mat, and it'll also allow that airflow in the back. So I'm going to take my linen hinging tape, which is acid-free, and I'm going to start by cutting off 3 little strips for this work. Then I'm going to peel the back off of this hinging tape, and I'm just going to take the bottom edge of it. I'm going to lay it sticky side up so it's stuck, just the bottom edge of that tape is stuck under the lip of my artwork. Maybe about 1/4 of an inch. But my goal here is to put as little adhesive on the artwork as possible while getting a firm hold. Okay, there. I'm going to slide that over. I'm going to take the mat. I'm going to carefully center it on top of the artwork. And once that's centered, I'll take a clean hand, or better yet, a hand that has a paper towel under it. And I'm going to really firmly press down on that tape so it sticks to the mat. And then carefully hold the top of that where I've got the tape, flip it over, and I'll continue to press down on that tape. Next, I'm going to, once it's firmly pressed down, I'll flip it over again. Make sure, I'll double check that that's still centered the way I'd like it to be. And then I'm going to add 1 more strip of tape across these 3 to make sure they're firmly adhered to the mat. Measure out the length that I need. And this tape is not going to touch the artwork. It's going to come close, and it's just going to hold those hinges onto the mat. So you can see my 3 pieces in the tape that goes across the top and how that creates a hinge. So the artwork is in place, but it still allows airflow behind the mat. Next, I'm going to set this piece aside, and I'll get the frame out that I would like to use, and I'll start getting the glass cleaned up for the frame. I'm going to set my frame aside for a few minutes while I clean off my glass. So I'm just going to take a clean cloth or paper towel with a little bit of glass spray on it and wipe down the front and the back of the glass to make sure there's no fingerprints on it. And from that point on, I'm going to try to handle it by the edges of the glass as much as possible. Okay, now that that's clean, I'll just hold it up to the light and make sure I've gotten all the fingerprints or streaks off of it. And I'll set that up into the side for a moment. Next, I'll take my artwork after I've got the hinge put on it and lay it on the backing. And I want to make sure that this is dust and free of dust or fuzz or anything else that might be on my nice clean white frame. I don't want to smush anything between the frame and the glass because it'll really stand out on this white mat. Sometimes I even take a very clean soft paintbrush and brush off the mat and the glass too to make sure there's no dust on it. Another trick you can use is to spray a little bit of static guard on your brush, and that helps get rid of any staticky dust that might be lingering around. But this looks pretty clean to me. If you have any little flecks that seem like they're stuck in the mat, it might be hard to tell in this video, but I've got a little dot right here. I just lifted it off with my X-acto knife if it doesn't want to brush off for you very easily. Okay, I'm going to take my glass. I'm going to slowly lay it down. I don't want to create a lot of air flow and kick any dirt back up under the glass between that and the mat. And then I'm going to just tilt my head down here and look very carefully. Again, I don't want to move it around too much because I don't want any extra fuzz or dirt to come up on the edges. But I'm going to just lift up the edges where I see there might be a little fleck of fuzz and kind of just work my way around and make sure I've got all of that out. Even if it doesn't look too prominent to you at the moment, little pieces of fuzz that are under there can shift around once you have the frame on, and they can be a lot more evident and pronounced looking down the road. It's worth taking your time at this point because a clean mat is really going to make your artwork look nice. You might have to go around it 2 or 3 times just to make sure you get everything. All right, that looks good to me. I'm going to take my frame and set that back on top. Then I'm going to very carefully, because I don't want to disturb the mat and the glass and get any sort of dust or fuzz back under there, I'm going to carefully slide this to the edge of my table so I put my hand under it and lift up this other edge, and I'll very carefully flip this over. So I've got the backing down on there, and now I need to secure the backing to the frame with some staples. Occasionally you'll get a frame and the staples are already stuck in there, and all you do is kind of pry them up with your finger and you set your artwork back in, and then you fold the staples back down. And that's great. Once in a while they break off, or like this frame, it didn't come with any. So I have these my little hand tool and these staples that I can put in myself. And this has a pointy end, and that pointy end is going to be what goes into the frame, and then I'm going to use the lip on here to push it in with this tool. If you do a lot of framing, you would probably want to invest in a little staple gun that will shoot these in for you. I don't do too much here, so this hand tool will work just fine for our purposes. Okay, so I'll line that up with the frame. You do want to press pretty firmly because you want to make sure this goes down and into the frame. Okay, I'll move it around, wiggle it a little bit, work it in there, and I'll get those edges as flush with the end of the frame as I can. All right, I'll do another one at the top. There. And before I get too much further, I'm just going to hold this other side down and check the front to make sure I haven't kicked up any dust or dirt on the mat. And we still look good. If at this point you double check and you see something there, it is probably worth taking your staples out and fixing that before you move on any further. And I will just go around the rest of the frame and make sure these staples all get put in. All right, my staples are in. I've got 3 on the long sides, 2 on the top and the bottom. The next thing I'm going to do is use my frame tape to seal up this edge between the frame and the backing. And that's gonna do 2 things. It's gonna do some double duty with these staples to kind of hold everything together, but most importantly, it's going to keep dust from getting, or dirt from getting down between the frame and the artwork. This is brown framers tape. It is not acid free, so it does not go on your artwork ever. It just is used to adhere the backing materials together. And once I get that laid down, I'm going to take an X-acto knife and trim it off around 3/4 to 1 inch from the edge of this frame. I want to leave room on the edge of the frame because I would like to put a dust cover on when I'm done here. And I don't want to put tape to seal my dust cover onto this tape because it doesn't really adhere very well. All right, the tape is on, and if this was as far as you want, I think you'd be fine to then just go ahead and put your wire on if you wanted to. This is a nice, clean, shaped up backing, and I think this is probably just right for getting up on the wall. I'm going to show you one extra step of putting a dust cover on the back, which just adds one more layer of protection, and it gives it a nice finished look as well. So to put that dust cover on, I'm going to use my ATG gun to put tape around the edges of the frame. If you don't have an ATG gun, you can always just use double stick tape. But make sure you get a good quality tape that's going to stay adhered to your frame. Okay, with my ATG gun, this guy gives me a hard time sometimes. We argue a lot, and I found that he works best when I press down pretty firmly as I roll the tape on. I cover all the edges. There. All right. Next, I'm going to roll my dust cover on. I'm going to make sure I clear enough room here. I don't have a big workspace, but I want to make sure I have enough room to put the dust cover on without having to move anything in the process. My dust cover roll. A dust cover is not the same as packaging paper or brown craft paper. When you buy dust cover, you want to make sure you're getting a product that says dust cover on it. The brown craft paper or packaging paper is thicker, and it's going to pull away from the tape on the back of the painting or the artwork. So make sure you have something that says it is specifically made for dust cover because it's going to be a thinner material. I've got a roll here that's already opened. I'm going to lay it, I guess you'd say this is face up, I don't know, but the roll is up. I'm going to put the roll down and center it on my artwork. And I'm going to put the roll on the edge where I've laid the tape. I'm going to make sure that's firmly pressed down. And then I'm going to slowly roll it out and kind of press on the edges as I go so it stays. I'm not pulling it to keep it taut, but I don't want it to be wrinkled, so I'm pulling it out pretty slowly so I don't get any buckles as I go. Okay, got that rolled over the edge. At this point, I'm going to take a pair of scissors, or you can use an X-acto knife, and just trim the dust cover off just over that edge a little bit. Okay. To make this a little bit easier to work with, I'm going to trim these outside edges just about an inch, inch and a half past the outside of my frame. Now I'll use my ruler and my X-acto knife and trim this to the edge. fold that down. I want to see the edge of my frame, and I'm going to take the ruler about 1/8 of an inch above the edge of the frame. I'm going to hold it down firmly and press. I'd like to press fairly firmly with the X-acto blade. You don't want to really cut into your frame, but I want to make sure I get one good clean cut and I don't have to keep running this over the paper more than one time. And then I'll pull the paper away. There's a little bit of glue from the tape in a couple spots. I'm just going to kind of rub that off with my finger. All right, perfect. Now I'm just going to move around and do the other 3 edges. The paper is on and it is time to put our wire on, and then we'll be just about finished. Before I put the wire on, I want to make sure that my painting is facing up. It's just a good idea to double check that and make sure that when you're done, you don't turn it over and realize that your wire is on upside down. So I'm going to turn this back over. I see Sarah's signatures down here at the bottom. Perfect. Turn it back over. And now I know my wire is going to be in the right spot. When you're putting wire on a frame, you always want to hang it about 1/3 of the way down the frame. It's a rule of thumb for any framing. And what this does is it keeps it balanced on the wall. If you put it down too far, halfway down, the painting will, or the artwork will lean forward on the wall, and we don't want that. If you put it too high, you will probably be able to see the hook hanging from the top of the painting, and the wire will stick out, and we don't want that either. So 1/3 of the way down is the rule of thumb for framing anything. You also want to frame from edge, you want to put the wire from edge to edge. You don't want, if you have any other backing material, you don't want to have the wire just in the center or at the top. You want to put it in the middle of the frame towards the edge. Okay. I'm going to measure my frame to make sure I get this put 1/3 of the way down. This frame is just over 17 inches, so 1/3 of the way is going to be between 5 and 6 inches. I'm just going to do 5 3/8. Mark that with my awl, and then I'm going to just make sure I'm in the center of the frame, and I'll tap my awl down to start a hole there, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side. 5 3/8. Make sure it's kind of in the center. All right, now I'm going to take my D-hooks and screw them into the frame. Make sure when you're purchasing D-hooks that they come with the screws too. Get a little Phillips head screwdriver. When you look at the sides of these D-hooks, sometimes there's a clip that is flat. There's a side that is flat, and there's a side that is slightly bent down. I like to put the flat side against the artwork. All right, this is screwed in, and I want it to be screwed in firm enough so this D-hook doesn't move or slide around. I want it to stay in this position. The other one. All right, D-hooks are in. Time to put the wire on. I like to start the wire. I usually start from right to left, and I put it through the hook and pull it over to the next one and pull it through. I give it about 5 inches that I'm going to use to wrap it around. Let me zoom in. Okay, so I've pulled the wire through the hook, and I'm going to loop it down under itself, back around, and then through the hook again. And pull it so it's firm. All right, let me show you that one more time. Pull it through the hook, give it around 5-6 inches, wrap it back around under itself, around the hook, and then back through. Pull it tight. All right, so that's firm. And then to keep it from slipping, I'm going to wrap the rest of this length of wire around itself. And I want to wrap it tightly against itself. One, because it looks nice and neat and tidy. And secondly, because this is what's going to hold the wire on and keep it from slipping. So once it's wrapped around itself, the more it gets pulled, the tighter it'll become. So I'm going to start by going over. And just go slow. The more you do this, the easier it gets to keep it nice and tight. But do you see how that's wrapped right up against itself? And you want to have enough wire to wrap it around about 1 inch. So that's about 1 inch. I have a little bit more. You can keep going with it if you want to, or you can just clip it with your wire clippers if you don't want to wrap it anymore. There. So that's all set. Now I'm going to do the other side. And the same thing, I've got my wire. I'm going to pull it so it's pretty firm. I don't want to leave a lot of slack because, again, it'll have a little give throughout its lifetime. It'll stretch, and you don't want it to stretch so much that it's hanging up really high, and then your hook, you'll be able to see your hook above the painting. So start out keeping it fairly firm. And I'm going to, again, take about 5 inches. This time I'll cut it off the reel. And I'm going to do the same thing I did on the other side, keeping it fairly taut. I'm going to wrap it under itself, back around the D-hook, and through again. See how it's still fairly firm? And then I'll just wrap it the same way I did the other side. For one last touch, I'm going to put Sarah's business card on the back of the frame. Double stick tape. We'll center that on the bottom. All right, we're ready to get this on the wall. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I hope it's given you some helpful information you can use in framing your own artwork. You can see we have Sarah's piece back up on the wall and ready to display at the gallery. If you have any questions about framing, I'd be happy to talk to you. Don't hesitate to reach out or stop down to the gallery and say hello. Thanks again.